Okay, so that was really important for the jury to hear, but let's break down what impact that may have had. And joining me right now is former prosecutor Randy Kessler. Randy, great to have you here on Law and Crime.
Thanks, been here. Good to be here.
Good to have you. So I got to ask you a question from the beginning. The prosecution actually put that interview that he had with the DA's office into evidence. And if you listen to it, it sounds pretty good for the defense to articulate why he had to defend himself. So my first question to you is, why would the prosecution put this into evidence?
I don't know. Maybe they want to provoke him to respond, to take the witness stand in his own defense to sort of repel or rebut something that came out there. Maybe it's a challenge. But you're absolutely right, because when this was taken, this was more credible than anything he would say on the witness stand. This was closer in time to the event. He wasn't being cross-examined, just being questioned. You know, it seems more honest and more authentic. So it's interesting that the prosecution did put that on. It sounds like it's not having the effect they wanted.
Do you think it would be wise for him to take the stand?
You know, you never know until you see the whole case, and I don't understand why you would put him on the witness stand if the prosecution hasn't proved their case. But if you can sense, if you're in there as a prosecutor, I mean as a defense lawyer, and you see, oh my God, the jury thinks he's guilty, and you get that feeling that they're going to convict him, that's sort of a Hail Mary. So really, that's a game-time decision. Right now, I don't think there's any reason to put him up. But, you know, we're not there. We're not feeling the vibe and the breath and the breathing and the winks and the noddings of the jurors. You got to take all that into account when you make that last-minute judgment call.
And these self-defense cases, I find we've covered a lot of them here on Law and Crime. We really don't know which way they're going to go. But at the end of the day, when you have a guy who's a father of 4, had a 5th baby on the way, it was basically a fight 2 against 1, and he's the one who ends up dead and stabbed to death. How much does that affect the jury and say, well, wait a second, we can't just let this guy off?
Well, you know, desperation calls for desperate measures. You know, what's he going to do? Self-defense is about the most legitimate defense you can come up with. You can try mental insanity, they can try that, but everyone knows that's when you're throwing everything up against the wall. Self-defense, at least there's some factual basis for it. I think it's what the defense had to do. You're right, though. The jury may not let him off the hook, or they may do a reduced charge like the other crime. They may say we're going to find him guilty of a lesser included offense. It's a tough one.
So I think we have about 20 seconds left. What would you be looking for today when trial starts at around 10 a.m.?
I'll be looking for, if I was a defense or prosecutor, I'd look for the way the jury is reacting to the questions. I'd look at the way the jury appears, and I'd see who the jury is looking at, as if, do they want more answers from the defense or more answers from the prosecution? All
right, well, we're going to be live there in about maybe 45 minutes or so, maybe something earlier. We're keeping an eye on the courtroom feed, but in the meantime, we have a lot more to discuss, including a little bit later the Nicholas Godejohn case. We'll be right back. Okay, so you could argue that the prosecution's case could be made or broke based upon her testimony. She's the star witness. I'm back here with Randy Kessler to talk about this. And Randy, I got to ask you, when you're listening to the cross-examination here, are they doing a good job at poking holes in her testimony?
They are, but boy, I wish they followed up that last question. They said, so you were not worried about him being attacked? She said, no, I wasn't worried about him being accused because he didn't do this. But that wasn't the question. The question was, were you worried about them possibly charging him even if he was innocent? And she responded by saying he was innocent, not by saying, no, I didn't even think that. Obviously, she was defending him. She thought he might be convicted or accused or arrested for a crime. She did not know he was dead. She did not know that the police had made a decision about which way to go. She was obviously defending him back then. So this is a really good cross-examination.
You know, we've talked about her testimony times being a little wish-washy, sometimes it being inconsistent, sometimes it's a little bit different than how she testified in the Demetrius Elder case. But couldn't you just chalk that up to, hey, listen, she's a human being, and she was there that day, and she is a victim herself. So maybe it's not fair to say what she did remember and what she didn't remember. She was right there when this happened, and it's a pretty traumatic event. Is there any water to that argument?
I mean, I agree with you, Jesse. The problem is that's the only one that saw it. She's the only one that was right there, so close to it, that you can't really say, well, ignore her testimony. We'll listen to the next 5 people. There's nobody that's as good. This person was right there, so you got to listen to her. And I think the cross-examination was good. Your brain was fried. You testified, and she didn't dispute that. What else did we say? That she was, he got out of the car often like that? Well, who gets out of the car at stop signs in the middle of the road at night? You know, it doesn't make him look so good. I don't think her testimony is really helping the prosecution.
Well, it's an interesting perspective because we were seeing the difference in how she testified in Elder and how she testified now. And remember, Elder wasn't convicted of manslaughter, but the lesser charge, and we always were curious about whether or not that influenced a change in her testimony, whether she was coached to do something differently, whether she wanted to do something differently, or maybe really it's just a circumstance. She just testified differently and that's it. Look, we have a lot of questions here, but we're going to talk more about it. And when we get back, we're going to switch gears and focus on our other live trial, the Nicholas Godejohn trial. We'll be right back. Let's break this down. I'm here with former prosecutor Randy Kessler. Randy, we believe, you just saw that interview, we believe that the Godejohn's attorneys plan to argue that he's autistic, that he's on the spectrum. It interferes with his ability to make rational decisions. I'm curious if you've ever seen that defense before and how it might look in this kind of case.
You know, again, it's desperation. I mean, the good thing for the defense is that Munchausen syndrome by proxy is a thing. You know, you said you've seen it a little bit on the media. 40 years ago, we never heard about it. You would have thought that's a crazy, ridiculous idea by the defense to say that the mother wanted to pretend her daughter was sick. You know, but now at least that's something that's going to help the defense. But as far as his autism, I think this clip shows he does have some issues. He's not the normal, everyday, all-American, football playing, perfect, kind of model citizen. He's got some issues. He's got some issues inside. The problem is there are a lot of alternatives to fixing this problem. He doesn't have to murder somebody to stop the mom from acting like this. There are a whole bunch of other things he could have done. And he, I wrote a note. He said it made him feel a little bit like a fool. Mm-hmm. Well, you feel like a fool. You can feel like a fool for buying your girlfriend flowers. You can feel like a fool for buying, but you don't feel like this is a little bit over and above. And if you feel like a fool for buying her flowers, you break up with her. This is sort of a really big leap for the defense, but they need something to hang their hat on. So this defense is about all they seem to have.
But is it the idea that he is a victim of Gypsy Blanchard, who is a victim of Dee Dee Blanchard, and at the end of the day, either the defense might blame Dee Dee?
Yeah, and they might be right, but the question is, even if it's somehow the victim's fault or somehow the girlfriend's fault, for him feeling the way he did, does that justify him turning around and doing what he did? And I don't think they get there with this defense. It's an uphill battle for them.
It is definitely one to watch. So, Randy, stand by, because that is not the only case that we're anticipating today. Yes, we are waiting for the Nicholas Godejohn trial to begin, maybe in about 5-10 minutes. I'm keeping an eye on that courtroom feed. But we're also keeping a careful eye out of Florida for the Armando Baptista trial to start as well. So we have two main live trials of the day. We're going to be back and forth talking about both. And let's not forget, a little bit later on in the program, we're going to have an interview with our very own Brian Ross, who's down in New York in the El Chapo trial. He's watching it, no cameras allowed, but he's going to report back to us. So as you know, here on the network, we have a very busy day. We're covering a lot. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned here on Law&Crime. Okay, let's break this down right now with former prosecutor Randy Kessler. Randy, we're listening to her testimony, and the thing is, some of it's not backed up by other evidence. And I really want to touch upon the part where she talks about maybe the altercation happening outside of the car. But we saw evidence that there was glass and maybe even blood inside Armando Baptista's car, the car that he was in with Demetrius Elder, which would seem to suggest the fight was at least happening in part inside. So what's the jury to do here when they have these conflicting pieces of evidence and testimony?
I think they're just going to feel bad for her. She witnessed a horrible crime involving someone she cared for. I mean, her testimony is all over the place. She says, it was on the right side of his body as she touches her left shoulder. Says he was 2 feet taller. She meant 2 inches. She's obviously confused. It was a horrific time. Anybody that would go through something like that would have a hard time remembering it. And probably she wants to be anywhere but right there on the witness stand. I don't think this lends a lot to the case on the prosecution side or the defense side, but it certainly is not this knockdown, win the case witness for either side.
Look, he's charged with manslaughter. So was Demetrius Elder. Demetrius Elder was ultimately convicted, though, of culpable negligence, the lesser charge. What was the jury considering there, and what do you think that might happen in this case as well?
I think that's what happens when juries are confused, or when you don't have a unanimous decision. You might have a few, 2, 3, 4 people on the jury that think all the way we got him all the way on murder one, and we have a few that are on the other side saying, I'm not really sure he intended it, and they compromise to get out of the room or because one side convinces the other side. But certainly that's what I think is going to happen in this case. That's what it looks like we're headed to. there's certainly not the most powerful, compelling prosecution case we've ever seen.
Well, we still got some more to go, and we are going to be live in that courtroom today and also live in the Nicholas Godejohn case. But let's take a quick break right now, and when we come back, a lot more to discuss. Okay, let's break down what's happening right now. I'm back here with Randy Kessler. Are you getting the sense about what witnesses would be allowed to testify and which wouldn't in terms of mental health? I'm curious what you've been seeing in the courtroom.
Yeah, they're all over the place. I think the defense obviously does not want this psychologist or this mental health expert to testify at all. He saw the writing on the wall. The judge was going to let him come in. And then the judge tried to parse it out. And the defense said, look, if he comes in, I want a full crack at him. I want to cross-examine everything. And I think the state's going to put him up, and the defense is going to cross him, and I don't know if it's going to matter to the jury.
And I guess the idea is mental health becomes a big issue because we believe the defense is going to argue the autistic aspect of this in the spectrum. Let's take a quick break, though. When we come back, we'll be back live in the courtroom, so stay tuned. All right now they're in a break in the Nicholas Godejohn case, but we're waiting for opening statements any moment. But let's break down what's been happening so far in the courtroom and what we can expect in the trial. I'm back here with trial attorney and former prosecutor Randy Kessler. Randy, let's take a step back here and talk about this. Now, I don't like to criticize any attorneys, but he has public defenders, okay? So that is, correct me if I'm wrong, that is a little bit of a different kind of legal defense than if you hired your own personal attorney, correct? What should the public think about that, our viewers, when they hear the public defenders? Is there anything to think about that?
You know, it's sad to be pejorative or to talk negative about public defenders because they're good people doing good work, you know, for low pay, generally. But public defenders typically don't have the resources or the amount of people or staff that a private lawyer does. If you can afford $1 million for a defense lawyer, then you're going to get staff and law clerks and investigators on your team. If you have a public defender, you've got a lawyer who's probably got 10 more trials ready to go in the same month. So it's not fair to judge. But on the other hand, you know, it's a free defense or a defense that the public's paying for. So they pass the bar, and they're smart people, and they're obviously doing a good job. They're putting on the right materials, but they don't have all the resources in the world because you and I are paying for it. You know, they're taxpayer dollars paying for these public defenders. So I think there's a little bit of a prejudice or bias in the public against public defenders as not being as good or as smart or as strong as a private lawyer. But it's not always the case. But
they have a right, you know, everybody has a right to a defense. And even if the state is footing the bill, shouldn't they be entitled to whatever they need to get?
They should be, but, you know, how much money is there to go around? And you know, what a private lawyer will do when we try cases as private lawyers, if our clients can afford it, we ask them, we say, look, we could do this much work, we could do this extra effort or extra investigation or look for these witnesses. It probably won't help, might have a 1% chance. And if you have all the money in the world and you're accused of a crime like this, you say, I don't care if there's a 0.001% chance, I want you to pursue that lead and this lead. You know, decisions have to be made, and when you have resources that are limited and finite, you just can't do as much as you can with unlimited resources. That's just the facts of life, you know?
Yeah, let's talk about their defense, because it seems to be a tough case. The idea that they may argue that autism, because apparently Nicholas Godejohn is on the spectrum, would play a factor in this killing. How do you think that's going to play in? And we also saw today some discussion about mental health experts being called to the stand. So what can we expect from this trial?
You know, it's really interesting, and we don't know the makeup of the jury, and there are definitely going to be members of the jury that have experience with autism and these kind of mental illnesses in their family, their friends. So if you strike a chord with one holdout juror, that might be all the defense needs. They might get lucky and say, that defendant reminds me of my nephew or my cousin, my brother, whoever it is, that had a similar issue, and I could almost see him doing something like this. It's a stretch, because even most people with autism, you know, they're not going to do something like this. Autism is not a defense for murder. But does it give somebody a little more sympathy? Does it make a juror able to bond with the defendant a little more? Maybe.
Yeah, just to let our viewers know, the jury consists of 9 women, 6 men, 3 alternates. Difficult case for them. They're waiting for the opening statements. We're waiting for them ourselves. But talking about defense and things like that, we can't forget that we're talking about Nicholas Godejohn, but one of the biggest issues in this case is that syndrome, Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which it was alleged that Dee Dee Blanchard, the victim, actually suffered from. and created fake illnesses for her daughter, Gypsy, that ultimately imprisoned her for years and confined her to a wheelchair for years when she really didn't need it. And that led into the motive here that Gypsy became so enraged, she actually enlisted the help of her boyfriend, Nicholas, to kill Dee Dee. But I'm curious, that Munchausen syndrome by proxy, if she had gone to trial, if we were covering her trial, and again, she pled guilty, second-degree murder, 10 years in prison, do you think that would have been a successful defense?
You know, I think she'd have a better time with it because it's almost like a self-defense thing. If she doesn't do something, she could end up dead or she could end up hospitalized forever or confined to a room. Who knows? I think she would have had a better chance with it. I think it's, you know, I don't know if this helps the defense or the prosecution. On one hand, yes, now people understand Munchausen syndrome by proxy is a thing and that maybe there was a reason to be upset at her. Maybe they needed her to stop doing what she's doing. I still don't think that justifies murder. On the other hand, it absolutely shows a motive for the defendant to kill her. They're basically saying he killed her and this is why. So they're not denying the fact that he killed her. It's almost saying, look, A plus B equals C. Here's his reason for doing it. He did it. It's not a justifiable reason. So, you know, it's a double-edged sword, but I think it helps the defense a little bit more than it helps the prosecution.
Yeah, it's a weird case where you never want to blame the victim, but here, that might be a big factor. Do you think the defense is going to point the finger at the victim and make her not sympathetic? And we can't forget the fact, as ironic as this is, we found out yesterday that there's really going to not be anybody there for the victim in the courtroom. There's going to be nobody on her side. She went from such a sympathetic figure back when everyone thought that her daughter was sick to when the truth came out, not so much.
Yeah, you know, you hear the term justifiable homicide. Well, if you can make the victim into somebody who is just a horrible monster, like they're making this person out to be, if that's true, then the people on the jury are going to be a little less likely to say, shame on you for killing her, or you know, look what she did to this little girl. And she deserved it. She had it coming to her. It's not his place. It's not anybody's place to dish out that punishment. But there might be people on the jury that buy that. And I think this is the kind of case where you're going to see a lot of blaming the victim. That's the only defense they really have.
So do you think in opening statements that the jury, the prosecution, they're going to say, first up, Dee Dee Blanchard was she was a mother. She was trying to do the best. Try to paint her as a sympathetic figure, because ultimately that's who this case is about, right? They have to establish that at the beginning.
I think they have to establish that, but they have to own the blemishes and the flaws in their own case. They can't ignore that, and then all of a sudden the jury thinks she's this nice lady, and then they hear about all this horrible stuff she did. The prosecution has to mention it. Yeah, she's a mother. She gave birth to this child. She raised this child. She fed this child. This child survived to a certain age. But they have to say something about the other side's going to accuse her of being this horrible person that's done these things. That's in dispute. But even if she did some bad things, who gets to punish her? We as a society, and she gets arrested, or does the daughter and her boyfriend get to take the law into their own hands? If we let people take the law into their own hands, we have anarchy and chaos. We can't let that happen. I think they have to do both arguments.
Okay, so if anybody's just joining this, we are talking about the Nicholas Godejohn case. But there's a lot of players here, and we can't not talk about Gypsy Blanchard, who you imagine the defense will say is the mastermind behind this plot to ultimately kill her mother. And she just manipulated, took advantage of Nicholas Godejohn to do that. I want to play, in case you haven't seen it, they did an ABC 2020 special on this whole case, and you will actually hear from Gypsy Blanchard about the night of the killing. So let's play that right now. All right, so Randy, you saw that, and we talked about the fact that she took a plea deal, 10 years in prison, second-degree murder. Was it wise for her not to go to trial? Because I wonder, I don't know when that special was, you know, but I'm curious. Do you think it would have been wise for her to do what she did? Because she's actually going to be up for parole in 2021. So do you think it was wise for her not to take the risk and go to trial?
Yeah, I think it was wise, but again, you know, we have to all put ourselves in her shoes, and it's very hard because what kind of gambler are you? What kind of risk taker are you? Do you want to, you know, all or nothing, or do you want the guarantee that you're not going to get the death penalty, you're not going to be in jail for the rest of your life? This plea deal seemed like a pretty good deal. If I was your lawyer, I would not want to be the lawyer that turns it down, goes to trial, and gets a conviction.
Yeah, and 2021, up for parole, chances she would get that?
Yeah, I mean, she's a young, sympathetic person. She can get back into society, make her life something of her life. You know, I don't see why she's not going to be a good candidate. Haven't heard anything. We haven't heard anything about her misbehaving so far. So the reason you get parole is good behavior? And do we think you can get back into society and do a good job and be a model citizen? And she seems to have the right path, and she would be a good candidate for parole from what we've seen.
At the end of the day, this is a stabbing death, a very brutal crime. I'm curious, though, in the sense of, you know, the defense trying to mount some sort of interesting defense here. Do you think that they have to say themselves, they have to acknowledge that what happened was a terrible, terrible incident?
I think so, and even in that clip, when you heard from her, she expressed some remorse. I mean, if he testifies, which I can't imagine he's going to testify, he's got to show some remorse, but he is a victim. He's making himself into a victim. We've seen him talk about how I thought she loved me. I felt like a fool. She made me out to be a fool. I thought she wanted me for me. Instead, she wanted me to help do this dastardly act. You know, I don't know how he gets that point across. I think he's got some problems, because even if he did it for what he thought were legitimate reasons, what reasonable person, and that's what we learned in law school, what would a reasonable person do? A reasonable person would not go out and kill somebody to remedy the situation that their girlfriend's been accused or abused or mistreated by somebody.
Yeah, he's a victim who was manipulated by a victim. That's really the way that we're establishing this. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we may be live in one of our live trials, so stay tuned here on Law and Crime. Welcome back, everybody. So we're about to go live into our trials for the day, but before we do, have to sign off our very special guest, Randy Kessler. Randy, thanks so much for coming on this morning and talking about all the different trials we're covering.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Okay.